Hey, so here are some reminders, and these are just not just reminders, but kind of overall the kind of crunched up information for writing your critical essay on the perfect match. So let's take a look. Now, first of all, remember, do your pre-writings. Those pre-writings, and do them, don't just do them like short. Do them, get as many ideas as you can in there, because those really are a very rough draft of this. They'll give you all the ingredients you need to put together the essay. Okay? So here we go. First of all, remember we're using MLA format, in-text citation. It's MLA. You're only using one source. So once you mention the author's name, once you say Qian Liu, you don't need it in your in-text citation anymore. In both MLA and APA, if you're using just one source in a response or an essay, then once people know that, you don't need it in that in-text, the parenthetical citation. Now, you may use it in your wording. So if you're going to say Liu is making the point that, definitely use it there, okay? Some of the things he points out, right? But in terms of that, with one source, we don't have to repeat it again. Obviously, if we had more than one source, we want to make sure and get that author's last name either in that sentence or in that citation, just to make sure people know which source we're using, okay? And then after you give a quote or a paraphrase, so I'm asking you, even if you paraphrase, if you can point and say, here, it was on page 24, or, maybe it's the bottom of 24, top of 25, so 24 through 25, then in that parentheses, after that quote or that paraphrase, you put the numbers, the page numbers. And remember, this is MLA, so there's no P in the page number, no P for page, period. No, that's APA next time. But right now, all we have to have is the number. Because in MLA, for our in-text citations, remember from that citation video, location, author, location. This is the only two things we need for our in-text citations here. So, and if you're kind of confused about what I'm talking about, go back in the schedule and go through that MLA documentation introduction video again. Go back to writing down the basics, read those introductions, okay? Those are really key. So if you are giving a quote, direct quote, something that's exactly as the writing, remember anytime you use somebody's writing or words exactly, you need to put quote marks around it. If you don't, that's plagiarism, that's stealing, okay? So put those quote marks around it and cite it correctly. That makes you look smarter, okay? But once you do that, you give a direct quote, or you can say, yeah, this thing happened. I'm paraphrasing, putting in my own words the things that were said or the actions that were taken in the story, then, yeah, you put that page number. Now, if you're referring to kind of a big part, so if you're saying, when Cy and Ellen go on a date, you don't need to put the page numbers that date is in, because that's just a general kind of overall story part. But if you're saying, at one point Cy says, let's turn Tilly off, and Ellen gives him weird side eye, then that's where you'd have page numbers, because that's like a specific part of that scene there. Okay. And let's see what else we got. Oh, let me give you an example. So when you're doing that citation, here's the example of how you might do it. Now notice this is a very long quote, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But here's the quote. So it starts out with the quote mark, and we don't have any space between the quote mark and the first word. Although everything had gone exceedingly well, if he was being completely honest with himself, it wasn't quite as exciting and lovely as he had expected. Everything was indeed going smoothly, but maybe just a tad too smoothly. It was as if they had already knew everything there was to know about each other. There were no surprises, no thrill of finding the truly new. And then notice right there, we have, boom, the end quote mark, no space. So that shows, where did our quote start? Where does it end? Make sure and always double check your quotes. I'm really bad about it. And students are too. We're all human about leaving, putting that first one in and forgetting that last one. Okay. So really look for those. And then we're going to have a space, and then we have this parenthetical. Now, this has more than just the page number. I already told you, since we're just using one story and we know it's Liu, we don't have to put Liu 25. So we just have 25 because this was on page 25. But then there's a comma, and this says original emphasis. Notice that this quite, it wasn't quite as exciting, is in italics. Whenever you quote something and it has, whether it's all caps or italics, bold, underlining, some sort of thing that's emphasizing the words, then you need to tell readers, hey, that's how the author wrote it. And especially when you're doing, like, this is literary analysis. So we're really looking at, or any analysis of a text, even if it's not a story, it could be an article. If you're doing that kind of thing, then you want to make sure people know, hey, the author put it in italics, because that shows author's intention, what they really want to get across there. Now, if you had put it in italics, which you really want to be careful about, it would be better to explain that in your words. When he says not quite, here's what he means, or here's how it's emphasized, it'd be much better. But if for some reason you need to give a quote and you really want to make sure certain word stands out, then you would put, and this is for MLA, not APA, then you'd have the page number, comma, and then you'd have added emphasis or emphasis added. And that shows that as a writer, you put that emphasis in to show it, okay? So there are some places in here where Liu does use italics. And if you're quoting one of those, this is one of the things you'll need to do. You'll need to have the page number, comma, original emphasis, and then notice we close the parenthesis, and this period goes at the end there, okay? Now, this looks like an exceptionally long quote, but really, if it's typed up in a regular Word document, it's going to be less than 5 lines long, okay? It's 4 or less, all right? So it gets the period at the end. Now, when we think about punctuating in-text citations, we do have 2 different places that punctuation at the end goes. So here's an example, and this is straight from Writing Down the Basics, page 82, and I'll put all the links in the bottom, in the description for this video. So Gary Taubes, there we have the author's name, so we're not going to have it in there, points out that when we feed our children treats we've become so accustomed to, we may be doing them more, we quote, may be doing them more harm than good, despite all the love that goes with it. Notice we end the quote, and then there's a space, and then 63 and period. So that's a real short quote. But there are different rules for when we have longer quotes. And in MLA, 4 typed lines or more, okay, we scooch it over. So here's, another Gary Taubes quote. It's the one that has all of this in it. And you can see that it's indented. It's scooted over. So when we look at this, let me go up here. Here's my our links that I'll be putting in there. But notice these little arrows that go over, okay? So that scoots it over, right? And then you can, of course, scoot it back, that kind of thing. But when you put it into your Word document, if you copy it in there, paste it, make sure it matches your format, same font, same size, all that kind of thing. And you're like, wow, that's 4 lines, or it's more than 4 lines, so it's 5 or more. Then go ahead and enter, and then do that indent, okay? Because that's what you want to make sure that it's scooted over. And in that case here, when we have the quote in with our own words, we don't indent it, it just goes along with our essay. We put the period at the end of the in-text citation. That kind of keeps the quote with, the citation with the quote. Excuse me. When it's at the end of a big block one, then the period goes inside and that. So again, you can go to Writing Down the Basics, and when you look at it, you'd want to go to the MLA format and documentation, and in the in-text citations section, punctuating in-text citations, And there's that exact discussion. Okay? All right. So there's that. Now, where do you get those page numbers from? You should be using the version that has the page numbers, the PDF. And notice here, the perfect match 24. The next page will be the perfect match, page 25, 26. There's your page numbers. Notice what else we've got. Name of a magazine, this, that, the other. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to pause. I've figured out that the pause messes up my audio-visual thing. So, all right. Okay. So when you use something from the story, if it's exactly his words, Leo's words, put quote marks around it. Okay? And then make sure and put that page number in parentheses. If it has like any italics or bold or underline or all caps, then put original emphasis. If you add the emphasis, put emphasis added, and that would also go in those parentheses with the quote, comma in the middle. Okay? Now, the key thing, too, is you can't just drop those quotes in there. In writing down the basics, one of the things you may have already read through is my analogy to baking a cake. If we take ingredients for a cake, we've got flour and sugar. Now we're putting them in the pan, okay? And we got some cocoa. I'm going to make it a chocolate cake, okay? And we got, I don't know what else, some vanilla and this and that. We crack the eggs on top, and we put it in the oven and say, yeah, I made a cake. That's not going to work. Notice I didn't say we mixed it up. That's going to be like some gross glob with like baked fried eggs on top. Nobody's going to want to eat it. I keep wanting to make one of those, but I'm just like, why would I waste the ingredients for a good chocolate cake? Oh my God. Maybe I should just take a picture. Anyway, I don't even know if we want to look at it, right? No. So what's going to happen to make that chemistry work? We've got to mix things together, and then those things that, like, if you were a kid and you thought, ooh, flowers and cake, and you tasted flour, that doesn't taste good. Cocoa on its own without sweetener, not a fan. All right. So one of the things that happens when we bake is we mix them together, and chemistry happens. Okay. So same thing here. If you just throw those quotes in and it's not connected to your writing, one, it doesn't fit that formal voice. So we're trying to hit that formal voice without trying to sound like we're kissing butt or we're from like the 19th century, okay? We don't want to sound like we're, from 300 years ago. To make it sound modern, but also make it sound formal. And one of the things that really does that is that integration of the quotes, making sure that you definitely, use your words to get people into the quote, and then it becomes much more natural. It's much more you. You're putting it in context, telling people during the date, things like that, this, that, whatever. Let's look at examples that I think is actually that one. So here's an example of using that quote we just looked at, and we could introduce it like this. While Cy is on his date, he questions whether having Tilly do so much for him is a good thing. And then there's the quote. Although everything had gone exceedingly well, boom, just like that. Now, there's two different ways to do this punctuation, depending on what we're using. So, for example, with the example I just gave you is the colon, right? While Cy is on his date, he questions whether having Tilly do so much for him is a good thing, colon. Although everything had gone exceedingly well. We get to use the colon if we have a full sentence. So, if you have a full sentence here, boom, and you're going to put your quote in. If you could put a period there, then boom, put the colon in. When you're proofreading your paper and you see a quote, you ask yourself, did I connect it in? If you have a full sentence before it, just change that period to a colon. Put another dot over the colon, okay? The other option is if you have any kind of he said, she said, Cy thinks. That's one way he's saying it in his own mind, right? So points out, notes, whatever it is, and this is true for APA, MLA, QRA, whatever you do, I don't know, right? At one point, Cy thinks, I'm being treated like a child. And so there we have that comma because it's a he said, she said. And so that's the way we would introduce that. So when you're introducing your quotes, if you have a full sentence, boom, put the colon, and then you give the quote. If you have any kind of he said, she said, thinks, points out, ponders, philosophizes, I think doesn't matter who writes. That's another way of saying something. We say things through writing, notes, argues, whatever it is. Put that comma, right? And notice that we've got the space after the colon here, and then we've got Cy thinks, comma, and then a space, and then our quote marks and our quote, okay? So if it's anything else, then you need to go through those comma rules and ask, just pretend the quote marks aren't there. Pretend in your mind they're not there and ask, would I need a comma or any other kind of punctuation? Well, if the first part's a full sentence, you already know, boom, colon, right? If it's he says, she says, which is a kind of extra information, right? When we see at one point Cy thinks, I'm being treated like a child, the main point of that sentence is I'm being treated like a child, that quote. But we just got to let people know we're giving them that extra information. Here's the part, here's what's happening, right? So that's extra information. So the only other thing it would be generally where we need a comma would be a list. And that's very rare to put a quote in the list, so you could see it happening, okay? So really, if you'll just stick with those two things, that'll help you figure out how to punctuate going into your quote, okay? Now, how do you punctuate at the end of the quotation marks? One, if you have that in-text citation in, you're going to end the quote with your quote marks and then give a space, and then you'll have that in-text citation and your period after there. Now, if you had, say you're quoting something where Ellen asks, are you crazy, right? And you just say, Ellen says, are you crazy? Remember when we looked at quotation marks, we said, if that question, the quote is the question, not the whole thing. At one point, Ellen says, are you crazy? We're not asking the question. We're just saying she said it, right? She's asking the question. So that question mark goes inside the quote marks, that final quote mark, okay? Otherwise, we're just going to throw that period at the end. It would be the same thing with the exclamation point, okay? So the standard quotation rules apply. The only thing we're doing is we're just moving that period to the end of the parenthetical in-text citation. And if you get confused, stop and look at examples. Go back to writing down the basics and look and say, okay, mine's like that. It's like that. Writing Center, okay? When you send it to them or you go work with them online and say, I'm not sure about my punctuation with my quotes, they'll help you out. That's what they're there for, okay? All right, some general reminders in terms of quotes. Don't use you unless it's in a quote, the word you. Here's an example. We don't want to do this. You may become dependent on too much technology and use your ability to make choices of your own. That is a perfectly fine sentence. But in formal writing, unless we're writing particularly to someone, when you write me a letter and you say you, I know you mean Kelly, right? But you're not writing this paper just to me. You're writing this paper to any interested reader. Imagine all of your teachers standing over your shoulder and reading. Okay, that's kind of creepy. Just reading it later, okay? So how do we get rid of that you? With you, the way you fix it is you ask, who do I really mean? Okay? Now, in my classes, I'm okay with you saying we, us, our. Because one, with this paper, we're really talking collectively about society in general, so we, us, our fits. But it may be are you talking about teachers, people who go on dates, people who use technology, then use those words. People who use technology, they. People who go on dates, they do this, do that, okay? So here, we may become dependent on too much technology and lose our ability to make choices of our own. And so I'm okay with the we, us, ours. Some teachers aren't. If you are matriculating, here we go, there's a nice new vocabulary word, moving on to university, I know if you're local, I know at UTEP, there are a lot of teachers that are not okay with the we, us, our. And usually if you do something that teachers really don't like, they usually tell you beforehand. okay? Like I'm telling you, I'm okay with it. So if you go to the writing center and they say don't do that, you can say, if you're like doing collaborate one-on-one, you say, no, my teacher specifically said she's okay with the collective pronouns or we, us, our, okay? If you get that feedback back on a paper, remember they're not in our class. So writing center tutors are giving you general advice, okay? And then you've got to say, oh, wait, okay, that's the general advice. Here's what I know my teacher said to do, okay? So there we go. So no use, okay? No, I think, in my opinion, no I at all, okay? And usually when you put it in there, you can just get rid of it. Notice, I think this story shows. Boom. Just say, this story shows. You don't need to like, oh, well, I think, or oh, it's my opinion. You may see it different. I know that. Any reader knows that it's got your name on top of it. This represents what you think about it. And it just represents what you think right now, not forever, not for always. You're not committed to it forever, okay? It's just like right now, when I was writing this, in the middle of the craziness of a semester, here's what I thought, okay? So you don't need the I, me, my, none of that. Don't tell life stories. Don't compare it to, you can compare it to your own life, like you see these things happening, but put it in that we, us, our, or some people, okay? Just get rid of that I, me, my, none of that. And then no proves. This proves that. No, you can say this illustrates that, this shows, you makes the point, it is clear that, anything like that. But to prove something, once you start getting into college papers and you use that word, you're saying prove it. Like, let me show you actual evidence that I can stack up, and it doesn't matter if you have a different opinion. In writing a literary essay, most of what we're writing about is more philosophical and more based in opinion and point of view. So for you, it is definitely your point of view. And as long as you can back it up and connect it to the story, evidence in the story, it's right. Okay? I mean, unless you can't just like have somebody go off and fly away if they don't have wings or some mechanism to fly. Okay? So we've got to have that logical connection. But as long as that is there, I may see it differently, and that's okay, right? So this is much more, philosophical, much more of a kind of subjective thing rather than objective facts. And prove implies there are objective facts that make this where there's no arguing about it. If there's no arguing about it with objective facts, it doesn't fit this assignment, because this assignment is about the philosophical, that kind of thing. Okay? Cool. So, save your proofs for science. Yay, science! So, all right, let's see where we're going next. Oh, there it is. And remember, you've got to have a works cited page. Don't just enter a lot to get to a new page. Insert a page break or use Control Enter, Command Enter on a Mac. Let me just show you how to do that real quick. Here I am on this page. Let me get back over there. Okay, I'm going to press Control, and I'm pressing Enter, and boom, look, it moved to a new page. If I want to insert, I can insert page break. Look, it moved to a new page. Yay! Okay, so do that, because if you just enter, and then turn it in, a lot of times when it's open on a different computer, it'll mess up the spacing. It'll funkify it, as in funky, but not the good kind of get funky and play that funky music. No, that's the good time. I love funk, right? But something funky, like the bad, stinky funky, we don't want that, all right? Okay, cite your source. Make sure you do your hanging indent. And I will put a link to this hanging indent how-to, which links you to, to how to do it in like every kind of source I could find. I mean, not source, but Microsoft Word, Word 365, Google Docs, Word for Mac, Apple Pages. This, again, remember, Word for Mac and Apple Pages. I am not a Mac person, so these are from other places, and I have the link to where they're from. And then there are videos, okay? So, and if you're doing Mac, please make sure and read this note. So make sure that you do that, because that hanging indent is very important. In fact, my first video for YouTube ever was a hanging indent one, showing students how to do hanging indents. And I had just put it up for my students. The next semester, I came back and I was showing my students, here's where this is, and there were like 300 hits, and then there were like 10,000, and then I have like over 250,000. I think I'm getting close to 500,000 hits on that stupid, and it's horrible. The sound is like some of the worst ever. It was on this little netbook I had. I couldn't find the right camera, this, that, everything. I get more comments and hits on that video because clearly teachers are saying, do this, and it's really easy, okay? So do it. Now, a word of warning. I don't mind you using words references feature, but it will funkify. So references, you can do that. First of all, it will, and of course we're doing MLA, right? But it will sometimes funkify your font and things like that. And also, it just puts computer coding in there that might not be necessary. I really believe, and, like I said, if you want to use it, you can. But in the end, it's not Word's fault. It's not Word's grade. It's yours. So you have to make sure it matches and it fits and it does it right. And, of course, remember, you're turning in a draft. I'm helping you, okay? But the thing is that it will mess things up sometimes, okay? And it puts things in these tables and these boxes that if you don't, like I use Word a lot, so I know how to make it work. But if you don't know that, it's almost easier. Just type it up. It'll take you a couple minutes, okay? Let's take a look at doing that. This is from Writing Down the Basics, and we are doing, remember it said that, in fact, look here, this is Lightspeed Magazine, so we know we want to look up how to cite a magazine, and this is from Writing Down the Basics, citing a magazine or journal, okay? And what you give is the author's name, the title in quotes with major words capitalized. Notice where that period is, where the quote marks are. The container, that's the magazine or journal title, in italics with major words capitalized. So, and then the number and the date. Now, here, this says issue 31. And magazines and journals do this weird thing that makes me crazy. It's actually issue number. That's the formal thing. But a lot of times they'll just put number or they'll just put issue, but and I know it's the issue number, okay? So that's what you want to remember there. So here we have, what's the author's name? Well, it's Ken Liu, but we do it alphabetically. So we put Liu, comma, Ken. We put, look, title in quotes with major words capitalized. There it is, right? What's the name of this magazine or journal? Boom, it was right there. We saw it because we looked at what we were reading. And one of the things you have to do when you're doing citation is really read the source, not just what the story says, but where is this from, right? The URL, if it's a website, what's on the side, what's here, what's there, what's at the bottom. That's where you find the information for what it is. The very first thing you have to do is you have to decide, what is it I'm going to cite? And remember, from the MLA thing, that was real specific. She's an English teacher. The MLA, I totally spaced. Video, this thing I'm making. When we go to the writer's reference, MLA, right here, we're going to say, what do we got? And one of the things we've got, wait, over there is, magazine, look, number 15, right? 15, so we go to page 15, we see that. Or you can go to Writing Down the Basics and go to page whatever. I'll put it in the description. And say, here's Kelly's version. So whichever version makes more sense to you, okay? Or both, read both. So then we're going to have the number. So what did we have? We had issue. And when you look at the samples, right, like this is just my instructions. When you look in the Writing Down the Basics, I give you an example. And it gives you both issue and volume because sometimes you'll have both. But we just do that. And then the date, and then the pages, and a period at the end, okay? All MLA citations, all MLA citations end with a period. Just think, they're mostly made for English teachers, and English teachers like sentences and punctuation, so just put that period at the end, okay? All right, moving right along. And see, there's our page number, right? And then there's this, and then at the top, of course, we have the title and the other stuff. Big issues. Now, these are big issues of writing. So those were all technical issues. Big issues of writing, make sure you follow through on your thesis, which should be the answer. Your thesis is the answer to the question you've chosen to answer, right? So you choose one of those answers from the questions at the end of the perfect match story, and then you say, okay, how would I answer it? Answer it in a full and complete sentence. Refer to some of the wording, right? You're not using the exact question in your essay, but pull some of that wording. And I showed you how to do that in at least one of those video walkthroughs. I know with the pedestrian I talked about that. So go back and look at that part if you need to. But so make sure you have answered that question. When you look at your paper, you should be able to figure out, you should be able to look at those questions and say, yeah, that's the one I answered, all right? Because if you can't, how the heck am I going to do it? Okay? So do that. Make sure that you have it clearly stated at the end of your first paragraph. That's where that thesis should be. You have that first paragraph, you get people into it, you make sure you provide, and we've looked at this each time with each of the walkthroughs, you give the author's name and the title correctly formatted in quote marks, right? And then you make sure at the end of that first paragraph, you've got that thesis. If you need reminders on those, go hit one of those walkthroughs again, because that's where I show you the exact parts of everything, okay? Does it answer all the parts of the question in a deep way? Not just like, okay, so there, see, it's like us, so what? Right, we're working toward that deeper, more philosophical issue. This is to let your hair down and be philosophical, okay? Do your body parts relate to the answer? Yeah, I know. It sounds crazy, but sometimes it's easy to get off on a tangent. I'm sure I've never done that. Yeah, right. I mean, geez, if you've known me for the last 5 minutes, you're like, wow, tangent. So anyway, make sure they're connected. I mean, once you write the paper, now again, you're not writing this from scratch. You have your pre-writings. Your pre-writings have given you all of these ingredients. So really what you're doing is you're putting them together, you're building them out. If there's parts you're like, no, that doesn't really relate, you're going to put that, set that aside. If there's parts where you need to explain more, what you're doing is all the stuff we've talked about up to this so far. You're getting those citations in, you're putting that quote into a sentence. All of those kinds of things, they lead to this, okay? So as you're looking over it, make sure that you look at that last sentence in your first paragraph and say, first of all, go back to the question you chose and say, read the question and then say, let me read this answer. Does that make sense together, logical sense together? Because sometimes I'll look at people's pre-writings and I'm looking at the question they chose and I'm looking at their answer and I'm saying, that answer has nothing to do with that question. It's like they just pasted it in there for the hell of it. I'm like, dude, don't do that. Point is, it helps you, okay? So make sure you've got those connections in there. And then in those body paragraphs, at the end of them, have you explained how that specific example from the story you gave in that paragraph, what you talked about, does connect to that answer, right? What does this have to do with it? And one of the things I did for myself later in my college career, I wish I had done it earlier, was I would handwrite my thesis, on a note card or just a spare scratch piece of paper, whatever. And then I would keep it beside me as I was writing on my computer. And then when I finished a paragraph or, if I was still in the zone, I kept going. But if I finished or I came to a spot where I couldn't think more, I'd go back and I'd look at the thesis. I'd look at what I had written on that piece of paper. And I would read a body paragraph and say, okay, do I explain how these connect, right? More than just see this shows that. You don't want to repeat that thesis. What does it have to do? What does it show about it? Why is it important? What does it matter, right? Am I saying something about that, right? And with the next one, okay, here's a different example. How does this show us some other aspect or maybe some deeper issue, something like that? How does that matter, right? And so that's what you want to do, because remember those little parts of the body where you're giving one example, in the conclusion, we're adding them up to something bigger, to something that's about, okay, see, here's that. Now you're saying, okay, so what does this show us about us, right? Or what is Liu saying about us? You don't have to agree with him, right? Like I said up front, when we did the introduction to the unit, it didn't matter if you liked the story or not. I hope you do. And I read and did a whole lot of things I didn't like, and I still do, daily life, right? So, I mean, it's about that deep thinking for it. So, write that out. Look for those things. It's just a good exercise to help you out. Topic sentences in your body paragraphs. Look at your body paragraphs. Just read through those and say, is it clear what this paragraph is about from the beginning? And if it's not, just say, how would I sum this up in one basic sentence, or give people context so they understand it? Pop that in front, okay? They just cannot be underrated, okay? Read the evidence and discussion in your paragraph. So this is that same kind of thing, right? Of look at that, okay? Look at that first paragraph. Does it sum it up? That's really what that topic sentence is about, is pulling it all together. Developing your conclusion. In the end, what are those big ideas? Remember that, and so as you do that pre-writing too, you've thought about, or you should be thinking about those big ideas. What's the big deal? Look at the question. What is the big deal? That question. What's the big so what behind that question? Because it's not just this story. Everything we've read has been about kind of social construction and technology, and this is called near future sci-fi. That things that I don't know could not happen. Who knows? But that we do have to think about. Right? Who owns our data? How much of it we're going to let out there? Who are we going to have control it? These are big issues, right? How does it affect our relationships? I mean, that date, Sai's relationship with Jenny, all of those things that come out of that. This story is saying something about all of that, right? How does this affect how we make our own choices? So whatever question you picked, just kind of sit back and think about that. Big picture, right? Then go back to that introduction. Once you've done that, stop and then read your introduction. What I would say is read through the body and the conclusion, and then go read your introduction and say, excuse me, does this all make sense together? Because if your body and your conclusion kind of come to a different point than you have in that thesis in your introduction, then your answer, maybe you kind of moved your answer, refined it more, refine that thesis too. Okay, it's easier to change the one sentence than change the whole essay to match that sentence, right? I mean, because part of doing this kind of writing is learning what you think. And so all the time, whether you're analyzing a short story like this, a poem, a play, a song, a video, a movie, or, an article about something really boring in your field or exciting in your field. In the end, make sure that you read through the body and conclusion of what you've written, and then look at your thesis and say, do the main ideas match? Because you learn as you write. You figure out what it is and refine what it is you really mean, and then you just fix that thesis sentence to make sure it matches the whole thing. Okay? Basic requirements for the final essay. What do you need for sure? Make sure you have your own title. The perfect match is already taken. It's not yours. Okay? That's Leo's title. That's the title of his story. What's the title of your essay? Look at the sample essays. They have titles. Okay? Right? You must have at least 4 paragraphs. You've got to have an introduction. Dude, man. Yay, Ronnie James Dio. A conclusion, introduction, conclusion, okay? Oh, but wait, you need to have at least 2 body paragraphs. You can have 3. You can have 4 if you want. Keep it short. Keep it short. We're doing this one short, okay? Type it up, spell check, use Grammarly. Remember, you're turning in that Grammarly report. And, again, you're turning in that Grammarly report. Go to the Writing Center. That's extra credit. and then write a cover letter about it. And remember, that's part of this assignment too, is we are writing a cover letter. So you can go to just the, of course, 1301 and the cover letter page, and there's the cover letter assignment, and there are samples here, okay? But make sure in your cover letter, just like we did in the practice format, make sure you're doing these things, okay? That's why there's red arrows, okay? What do you talk about in paragraph 1? Remember, just 1 or 2 sentences. What do you talk about, and what do you got to do in paragraph 2? Notice there's underlining here. I should have this in bold. I'm not supposed to underline, okay? What do you talk about in paragraph 3? Notice, there's, that says give it a specific example. That one's actually, I'll fix it. And then what do you got to do down here, okay? So make sure that you are doing those kinds of things in your cover letter. Oh, wait, where'd I go? There I am. So make sure you've done that. I already went through those other things. Okay. There you go. Those are the kind of things I would tell you if we were in class and we'd talk about, you'd be asking questions, so we'd fill up the whole hour of class. But now I'm done. So let me know if you have questions. This is the week when you're just working on that draft. You're turning in draft to me. You turn in the draft on time, and it's thoughtful. It's not just, you should be able to have the 4 paragraphs between your pre-writings and, your pre-writings. You should be able to have those. So you have at least 4 paragraphs. It's thoughtful. It's on topic. Then you get a 100 for the draft. That is just like another pre-writing assignment, okay? Then I'll give you that feedback, and you can ask me questions. I'll give you the feedback. It'll take me a couple weeks to do everybody's. I'll get it back to you. I'll give you the feedback. You ask me questions. You'll have a couple weeks to work on revising it, okay, and fixing it up. So you're not turning in the final, all right, because it's good to do teaching before you take the final test. I don't know. I'm weird that way. So, all right, so there we go. Go off. Be well. Get started. Bye.